Today's webinar, an implementation guide to leading indicators. During today's presentation, attendees will be in a listen-only mode. If during the program you would like to submit a question, you can do so anytime by using the chat pod, which is located in the lower left corner of your screen. Just type your question in the box at the bottom and click send. Should you have any technical difficulties, you may contact the help desk, and I'll leave you that number. It's 877-297-2901. So now I'll turn the program over to Joy Inouye. Joy?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar on an implementation guide to leading indicators. My name is Joy Inouye. I am a research associate for the Campbell Institute, and if you are familiar with our previous research and just other webinars that we've released in the past, you'll recognize that this is a topic that we've presented on quite a bit in the past, leading indicators. This is our latest webinar that relates to the last white paper that we just put out last month in September on an implementation guide to leading indicators. We're really excited to present this to you today. Just to give you an idea of what you'll be hearing on the program, first of all, I have to introduce my co-presenter. His name is Kevin Converse, and he is the Director of Division Safety over at United Rentals. So Kevin, he's in addition to being part of the United Rentals safety team, he's also a member of the Campbell Institute. He has extensive experience working as a safety professional in building programs, loss control, communications, engaging the workforce, and building a safety culture. Kevin has focused much of his employment on building lasting safety programs, working with OSHA matters, and building a framework for safety engagement. He's worked with United Rentals for over 11 years in a safety capacity in most areas of the organization. He holds a bachelor's degree in information technology from the University of Phoenix and a certified project manager degree from the University of Portland. He's also served in the 82nd Airborne Division and the 2nd of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, where he earned, among other recognitions, his Parachutist Jump Wings, along with Combat Infantry Badge and Army Commendation Medal. Kevin is an active member of the American Society of Safety Professionals and the National Safety Council, and currently serves as the chair for the Campbell Institute Leading Indicators Workgroup, and that is the reason why he is joining us today. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
All right, so to kind of give you an overview of where we're going today, we're going to take you through a little bit of the background of the research that we've done previously on leading indicators, and then Kevin is going to chime in from time to time with some of his thoughts on what United Rentals is doing with leading indicators, and he's really going to give us some great examples of some leading indicators that United Rentals is currently implemented and is tracking. So hopefully you will get some great information from us today as we go through this. Just a little bit about the National Safety Council before we start. We are a nonprofit organization. We're about 106 years old. What you see right here is our mission statement, which is to eliminate preventable deaths within our lifetime. And the way that NSC intends to do this is to look at those areas where the most preventable deaths occur. And so it would be in these three areas that you see on the screen. It's going to be at work, at home, and in the community, and also on our roadways. And the Campbell Institute fits into this piece primarily in the workplace arena. Much like NSC, we are also composed of organizational members that are part of the Campbell Institute. Our vision for the Institute is to be the trusted source for protecting people and preserving the planet. Our mission is to help organizations achieve and also sustain that EHS excellence. And the reason we do this is because we believe that protecting people and preserving the planet are just integral pieces to business excellence. If you would like to know more about Campbell Institute and who comprises it, this is our latest honeycomb of participants. These are members and partners of the Campbell Institute. You see United Rentals on here as well. All our members are vetted for excellence in EHS, and if you are interested in participating in some of our events or maybe becoming a member of the Institute, we encourage you to visit thecampbellinstitute.org. And you'll see that, that website later on in this presentation. But just to give you a preview into the presentation, we're just going to launch into the introduction and background of the previous research. So this research on leading indicators actually began about 6 years ago at this point. It really began in 2013 with a survey of EHS professionals, and we created this framework for looking at leading indicators, and it's what you see here: define, align, refine, and design. So in the define stage, here we were trying to derive a definition for leading indicators and also identify important attributes for effective leading indicators. Also developing a taxonomy for looking at leading indicators. In the align stage, we were asking EHS professionals about the current state of their use of leading indicators and also different enablers and barriers to their use. When we move on to the refine stage, we were actually asking our Institute members, what are the leading indicators that you are looking at? How do we categorize these leading indicators, and also what are the specific metrics that you use to measure them? The latest paper the paper that we had previously released, this one was called Design, and was about the implementation and improvement plans for leading indicators. So right now I'm going to take you just very briefly through some of this previous research that we did on leading indicators. So when we talk about defining a leading indicator, we got together, like I said, a group of our EHS professionals from Campbell Institute members, and they define a leading indicator as proactive, preventive, and predictive measures that monitor and also provide current information about the effective performance, activities, and processes of an EHS management system. And these indicators will drive the identification and the elimination or control of risks in the workplace that can cause incidents and injuries. So it's quite a long definition, but what you see on the slide is a shortened version. Basically, a leading indicator is something that is a proactive, preventive, and predictive measure. We also had, in this stage of the definition stage, some critical characteristics of robust leading indicators. So our expert panel of EHS professionals at the time, they described leading indicators as having the following characteristics: being actionable, achievable, meaningful, transparent, explainable, valid, useful, and timely. Now, a leading indicator, a good one, would rarely possess all 8 of these characteristics, but our panel at the time agreed that having a combination of these characteristics aids in the implementation, measurement, and also the selling of leading indicators, both to workers and to management. In the align stage, this is where we're talking about the current state of leading indicators and also enablers and barriers to leading indicator implementation. So some of the enablers that you see here is having executive buy-in or executive support of leading indicators. They don't necessarily have to have the technical knowledge of how leading indicators works, but they have to support their safety teams in that effort. Other enablers that we found were having some corporate level leading indicators, not just ones that were based upon region or business unit. Those are great too, but having some that are tracked at the corporate level as a way to get everybody in the organization on board with leading indicators. Also being able to really communicate and explain the predictive value of leading indicators to an organization is an enabler to implementation. And lastly, having some kind of targeted data collection for specific outcomes. So for instance, leading indicators that are specific to eliminating, say, specific types of injuries, like hand injuries, for instance. There were also some. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
So on that last slide you were at, I just think one of the key ones for us is ensuring that you have executive buy-in. So I think for any organization where you want your executive level teams to look at something, but also hold the field accountable as well, you want to make it simple enough, and we do have, without technical knowledge there, but we want to make it simple enough for folks to understand so that you can articulate the need and the want at all levels of your company. So I think that really is a key one, at least for me and for our organization.
Yeah, and I would echo that. That's something that came up over and over again in our interviews with Campbell Institute members. You know, what is the biggest enabler to implementation? And over and again, that was the one that was cited, is just having your leaders on board to support the leading indicator program effort.
And
so,
you can always dial in to more specific sets of information that you'd like to measure that maybe get into some predictive analysis down the road. And that's, but once you have the fundamentals done, I think that's key for any business.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. All right, great. So these were the enablers that our expert panel found. Quickly kind of looking at the barriers to implementation here, we had an inability to develop consistently actionable metrics, that is, finding metrics that consistently and clearly tell an organization how to act on the data generated. That can be a barrier there. Another related barrier to that is the lack of a reliable, consistent relationship with lagging metrics. A lot of leading metrics that once had a strong correlation with injury rates may become less informative over time. So that's kind of the barrier there. Another barrier is the continued C-suite reliance on lagging indicators. And lastly, organizations can find it difficult to benchmark leading indicators with other organizations, even within the same industry. And it's really that last part here about sporadic, infrequent, and non-standard benchmarking that led us into the next stage, where we asked our Campbell Institute members to think about the leading indicators that their organizations look at, and kind of put them into different baskets, which you see here, and to start benchmarking against each other on it. So in the refined stage of our leading indicator framework, this is where our members produce lists of leading indicators, their definitions, and also specific metrics for each leading indicator. They divided it up into these three categories that you see here of leading indicators. So behavior-based leading indicators are those that measure the behavior or action of individuals or groups in the workplace. They're used to measure activities, thoughts, and perceptions. They may be very useful at site level through the management level. The operations-based leading indicators are those that are relevant to the functioning of an organization's infrastructure, so say machinery, work processes. These are potentially very site-specific leading indicators. And lastly, there are the systems-based leading indicators, and those are indicators that relate more to the management of an EHS system. And these are the ones that can potentially be rolled up from a facility level to a region or business unit, or even to the corporate level. So we did have, at the time, we created what we called a leading indicator matrix that divided up the leading indicators that our Campbell Institute members at the time for tracking into operations, systems, and behavior-based. What you see on the slide here is just that kind of first level of leading indicators. Each of those different things, so say under systems-based, you have hazard identification and recognition. Under hazard ID and recognition, you would have, say, like 10 or 15 different metrics or ways of measuring hazard ID and recognition. And so each of the line items that you see on this slide probably have anywhere between like 5 to 15 different metrics of measuring each of these leading indicators. So that was the in the white paper that was called the Practical Guide to Leading Indicators, and it included the full matrix. So if you were interested in that, I would suggest going to that paper and reading that for yourself. At this stage in the Campbell Institute research, we got a lot of questions from our webinar audiences and also conference audiences about, this is saying that this was great information, that they appreciated having these lists of leading indicators and metrics. They appreciated knowing the kind of current state of leading indicators and how to define it. But they wanted to know more about developing and implementing plans to deploy, evaluate, and also improve leading indicators. And that's what got us into the design stage for developing and designing a leading indicator suite. So this particular graphic comes from the paper that's called Elevating EHS Leading Indicators from Defining to Designing. And these are some of the tips that our members had for getting started. And some of them are to look at what's already being measured. I'm guessing that your organizations collect a lot of data already, and you're already measuring a lot of data points. Could any of those things that you're already collecting be used as a leading indicator? That's a great way to get started. Another piece of advice that our members had was to just get started tracking something. It could be one or two things. It doesn't have to be a whole suite of, say, 10 or more leading indicators. The more time that you spend deliberating is less time that you can spend collecting data. So just starting somewhere, starting simply and small, was the suggestion from our members. Other pieces of advice here, just like Kevin was mentioning earlier, obtain that leadership support. You need to have your executives on board to even begin to start thinking about using leading indicators. And also, once you have those leading indicators that you are tracking, make sure that the data that you're taking from them is being integrated back into your safety management system. These are not just data points that are hanging out by themselves and not providing any information back to overall safety. How do you use that data? How are you using that to improve your SMS overall?
Hey, Joy.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that the second point there on just getting started, we shouldn't overemphasize that enough. Is that you already have mass amounts of data that your folks are collecting, your company's collecting it somewhere with the finance department, the HR department, and we're going to talk more about this later. But just get a couple of, 2 or 3 out there. It doesn't have to be something extensive where you have 5 different sets. You're tracking multiple different things. If this is new and you want to look at a certain segment of your business, 1 or 2 will do to get you on the right path. And then from there, once you get the buy-in, once you get a system down, a tracking method down, or you already have some sort of system you're already utilizing that gives you the right data, and then you can start to tweak it, then you can move on to sets 3, 4, and 5.
Right. Yeah. Yes, these are, you can see that even though this paper was released just a few years ago, that the advice in it still stands. So yeah, definitely.
And for those folks that are wondering about links to what Joy is speaking to and talking about, she will give that information at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, that's correct. So for those of you that are asking, there will be a recording available of the presentation. You will receive a link to that recording in a thank you email after our presentation concludes this morning. So thank you all for asking that question. And yes, like Kevin says, we will provide links to the latest papers. All right, so we now get to our latest stage when it comes to leading indicators, and this is benchmarking and ranking of leading indicators. So this latest stage was one that our Leading Indicators Workgroup took on. It was a broad benchmarking exercise in which each participant of the workgroup submitted a list of the leading indicator metrics that their organizations were actively tracking in 2018. And these lists of leading indicator metrics were collected and categorized by topic to create a comprehensive list of the leading indicator metrics that were in place at our Institute member organizations. And over the next several months, we held a series of teleconference calls, and participants of the work group met to rank and also categorize these leading indicator metrics according to organizational maturity and also complexity. So that means, where does an organization have to be in its safety journey in order to implement the leading metric? That's maturity. And then for complexity, how complex of a process is it to track and calculate a given metric? So Kevin and I are going to take you through a little bit of both of those concepts here of organizational maturity and complexity. When you talk about organizational maturity, we really base this on the DuPont Bradley curve, which is perhaps something that you all might be familiar with at this point. And so when we categorize these metrics according to organizational maturity, we use the same ranks or categories as the DuPont Bradley curve. So going from reactive to interdependent. And so we kind of created our own ways of defining each of those steps. So in the reactive stage, you can see from the graph that means that culture strength is relatively low, injury rates are relatively high. This is the base level of maturity where they may still believe that incidents and injuries will happen, and leading indicators, if they are in place, they haven't been in place for very long. That's kind of the baseline maturity level. As we move up, yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, and also maybe that the organization is focused on the very popular lagging indicator of incident rates, lost work case rate, recordable rate, however you refer to it at your organization, where that's one of the biggest qualifiers for those folks.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Leading indicators aren't really very much in the picture. It's very much lagging indicator focused. Yeah, sure. When we look at the dependent stage, this is an intermediate level of maturity where people view safety as just following the rules. And leading indicators are in place, but they're in place to achieve compliance, or maybe they're there because of a leadership mandate. And at this point, you start to see injury rates decrease a little bit. In the next stage is called independent, and this is a more advanced level of maturity. And this is where people take responsibility and believe that they can make a difference with their actions. And in this stage, leading indicators are seen as vital to continuously improve safety performance. And you start to see injury rates decrease even further. And then Lastly, in the interdependent stage, this is the most advanced level of maturity where teams take ownership and responsibility for safety culture and believe that zero injuries is actually attainable. And then also teams seek out new leading indicators that go beyond compliance. And Kevin, I know that you had something to add here about teams, right?
Yes, I would say, folks, you could take this image, and you can Google this, and it's all over the internet, and take the image, and this is a good way to spark the discussion within your organization. If and maybe even you're at a mid-level maturity, and you're somewhere in between a dependent and independent, and this image can help drive the discussion on where we're at, where your peers think you're at, where the organization leadership thinks that you guys are at, and you can utilize this to say, okay, are we tracking the right thing? This is a fundamental image that can help draw out people's ideas and discussions and narratives on where you are and where you want to be.
Right. Yeah, and obviously there, like Kevin was saying, yeah, this DuPont Bradley curve, I mean, it is all over the internet. You can find a lot of information on it. They have specific definitions for these different levels of maturity. We kind of adopted them for specifically to talk about leading indicators, but yes, there's definitely a lot more that you can find, a lot more information that you can discover elsewhere. So that kind of talks about the organizational maturity side. When we talk about complexity, the complexity ranking, we kept it not complex. We kept it pretty simple. But this was to talk about how complex of a process is it to track and also calculate metrics. So some of the factors that our work group took into account when trying to assign a complexity ranking to each metric was the time and effort that's needed to collect the metric, the risk profile of the organization, perhaps the size of the organization. So in some cases, the larger the organization, the more complex would be the implementation. So we have these three levels to rank complexity. Low meaning that there's minimal time and effort to gather the data and to calculate that metric. And in fact, the organization may already be collecting the necessary data. So just to reference what both myself and Kevin said earlier, perhaps your organization is already tracking something that could be leveraged as a leading indicator, in which case the complexity level would be low. For medium complexity, this is moderate time and effort to gather the necessary data. It may require more coordination and communication among teams to collect, track, and analyze that information to use across the organization. And lastly, for a high complexity, here we're talking about a lot of time and effort to gather the necessary data, and it requires deep levels of coordination and communication among teams to analyze the information that the leading metric provides. So this would be our complexity ranking. Kevin, did you have anything to add here?
No, I think you covered it quite well. Thank you.
Okay. So now that we got to this point for the maturity and complexity ranking, we're just going to show you some examples of the first three tables of leading indicators that we have in our latest white paper. So if we'll provide you a link at the end of the presentation to the latest white paper. You'll see if you get the print version or if you download the digital version, you'll see there are actually 17 different tables. And that means that there are 17 different categories of leading indicators that the work group specifically discussed. Some of those are longer lists than others. But we start with the first three that we see in the paper. I'm going to show you an excerpt from some of them. And then Kevin's also going to talk to you a bit about, the metrics and leading indicators that United Rentals is specifically looking at. So what you see in the slide here is the first table that we have of leading indicators, and there are actually, this is just an excerpt. There are quite a few more that will not fit on the slide here, but the first leading indicator category was on hazard reports, unsafe condition reports, and proactive observations. And you can see from the table that we included what the formula for calculation is. The organizational maturity level that the work group assigned to that particular metric, the complexity level that the work group assigned to that metric, and also an explanation or justification as to why they assigned it that maturity and complexity level. So for instance, a metric for observations or hazard reports could be the number of observations per month. That's something that the work group assigned as reactive, so and not particularly high in maturity. It's something that can be done at a base level of organizational maturity, and also the complexity is low. And the explanation being that this is basic information that can be gathered easily in an organization. I've also included some other ones from further down that same list. So something like at the very bottom here, the number and also percent of previously unknown or uncategorized hazards that are discovered. This is something that the work group categorized as dependent on the organizational maturity level. So, more advanced maturity, people are taking responsibility for safety and kind of leading with their actions. This is, in terms of complexity, it's something that's seen as high among our work group members. And the reason being that this is a metric that sort of implies that an organization has been looking and tracking at leading indicators for some time. So it requires that level of maturity. Also, it requires tracking and categorization of hazards. So this is the reason why we consider this to be high. So you can kind of
and I just wanted to, Joy, say this group was upwards of probably, what do you think, 30 members that were part of the team. So there wasn't just Joy and I going through and looking at the formula, looking at organizational maturity and complexity levels, so on and so forth, and explanation. This was a roundtable discussion made up of the committee members to get to where we were on this. And so the low, medium, high is basically a discussion committee, and it really it took us a length of time to get through the master list of all of our different calculations.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, this is this paper and is really a testament to the time and effort that our institute members and volunteers put into the conference calls and into discussion with each other. So yeah, this is definitely a good work product, and we're very proud of the effort that our members put into this. And yeah, and also so it's not just me and Kevin discussing this. This is all all our Campbell Institute members being part of this discussion.
And I would also say that the folks on the call, their opinion may differ on the complexity level and organization maturity level, and that's okay, because it's getting you to think about what we're looking at and the maturity level that you may have a different idea on, especially for your own organization, and that you can move forward on and create your own master list of indicators, that ones you may want to roll out now and ones you may want to roll out when you become the next level.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is not meant to be a definitive list by any means, but yeah, just something to get people started, like Kevin said, thinking about it. So Kevin has an example here of observation reports from United Rentals, and Kevin, I'll let you explain this slide and what we're looking at here.
Sure. I just put up some data and a mock slide to show you, and Joy, if you quickly go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
So what we're looking at is just number of observations and type. So for us, if we were looking at this matrix, it would be number of observations per month and type, which is reactive and low. And then Joy, go ahead and go to the next one.
Yeah.
And so here we're looking at different categories of observation reports that we have in United Rentals. We have near miss, good catch, stop work, property, and non-work event. Now, you may ask about the non-work event, and that is where we allow our employees at their request, because we promote safety universally. We need 360, it's a 360 event or a 360 logic. You have it at home, at work, and at play is where you should be looking at your safety and hazard recognition. And so our employees came back and said, you know what, we'd like to be able to put in something that happened over the weekend. And so we have a segment of our system that allows them to select a non-work event, and they can put something that happened at we've had a barbecue or event, or with a Thanksgiving fiasco with a turkey fryer, or there was one where an employee was installing insulation on his own and didn't think about a respirator and safety glasses and that type of thing. So it's those types of events that help the employee population think of this as a non-punitive report. That's something else that I don't think we discussed yet, but when we ask for and rate a near miss, good catch, or stop work, we don't look at it from a punitive standpoint where we're going to discipline the employee. We look at getting the information, solving the problem, and looking at a corrective action for the task or the event that took place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So we have a couple other examples for you from the paper, and then also Kevin has some other examples for you as well. The second category for leading indicators that we included in the paper was on training. So personnel trained and system training completed, and I included a mix of different metrics of varying organizational maturity levels and complexity levels. So some of the things that you see that are kind of low in maturity level and low in complexity, so reactive and low, some of those metrics are percent of trainings completed, or percent of new hires who have completed safety orientation training. The reason for those being ranked as they are is that regulatory compliance training is pretty basic level. Some of the other things that you see here that are maybe higher maturity, so dependent and maybe medium in complexity level, would be things like percent compliance versus program requirements. The reason being that this is an audit of the major elements of all the programs to check for compliance. So it requires a little bit more maturity, and complexity level requires a little bit more time and effort and maybe a coordination between teams to kind of make that metric happen. Kevin, before we move on to the example from United Rentals, is there anything that you wanted to mention on this slide?
Certainly, yeah. And some of these formulas here, you may already have in a system that is where you track all of your incidents, whether they be a near miss report or a first aid incident or another type of injury. For instance, where you have a number of incidents with root cause that includes lack of training. That may be something that that's already hidden in your reports that you can pull out. So for us, we use a system that asks those questions, and we can go back through, look in the system, and do a quality check, is what the report is called, and then look to see what was answered in those types of incidents that have occurred. So very key to having a quality system in place. And there's nothing wrong with just checking through some of the lower level complexity issues with an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe you're getting training reports from your human resource department. That's okay, because you have to start somewhere. But as you move up in complexity and move up on maturity levels, it's really important to have a solid system in place where you can pull your data from. So somebody did ask a question I see on lagging indicators was, should they be going back and looking at incident investigations, root cause analysis, kind of what this goes to right here? Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with going back to see, do you have a repeat incident or repeat injury? Was the task that the employee was performing the same as the previous years or previous months? Those are things that are good to look at, and they kind of go back to, was there a corrective action that was launched for that, and was it closed out properly, which is something that we'll get into later.
Yeah. So on the next slide here, we have another example from United Rentals, and this is regarding their technical training hours. Yeah, Kevin, what are we looking at here?
Sure. There's something that I put a mock slide together of what we track on a region level. We require at least 24 hours of technical training, or actually it's 24 hours technical training per tech. And when I say this is outside of safety training, this is outside of anything that comes from our corporate training department. This is solely on tech training. So, for instance, we have a lot of aerial lifts. So it may be working with a manufacturer on a scissor lift control box, or maybe working with a manufacturer on a hydraulic boom lift. And so we track and look at how many techs, how many hours they have, and have they reached that level given a certain time of year. And this is a bit of a mock slide where I put some numbers together to show you what it is we're looking at. And this is important for us to know that the technicians are receiving manufacturer certified training on an annual basis. And it helps us ensure that they know what they're doing, that the machines are being treated as such per the manufacturer. And it also slides right into safety, because if the manual is correct, the employee is getting that training from the vendor correctly, then that ensures that they at least have the knowledge to do the task, the maintenance task, whatever it may be, hydraulic line, to complete that task correctly and safely as well.
Great. So we have another example here from the paper, and this leading indicator category is on completed corrective actions and safety work order resolution. So once again, including an excerpt from the table. It's not the entire table, but I just wanted to give you guys a good idea of what is included here. Now, interestingly enough, none of the metrics that we listed in this table are at a low complexity level. They were all medium, but different levels of maturity. But you can see some of the things that are up here listed as reactive and medium, things like the number and percent of completed corrective actions by a specific due date, or another metric, the number of open issues without a corrective action assigned. These were listed as being reactive and medium because it's basic information that can be gathered easily. And some of the other things that are a little bit more mature that you see kind of farther down on the table, say percent of preventive and corrective actions that are communicated. We see that as the work group saw that as more dependent when it comes to the maturity level, and also medium when it comes to complexity level. The reason being that this is an organization that is going beyond just merely counting corrective actions. They're actually making sure that those corrective actions are being communicated to the larger organization. So yeah, these are just some examples here. Kevin, any thoughts on this slide before we move on to the example from United Rentals?
Sure. We allow our managers to, if they are not finished with a corrective action, to move the date, and so that's key. It's a little it's a hidden gem in a system that if you set a date, a corrective action closure date, say for December 31st, and that management team isn't finished with the work, you need to allow them to move that forward, and that can both help them, help you, and give them better ownership or broader ownership of the corrective action. Mm-hmm. I think the last one there, where it says number of effective corrective actions verified by managers, is very important to have management sign off on, yes, we did it, it has been completed, and I've signed off on this by the due date of such and such. So, and your corrective actions can be all levels. They can be global, they can be regional, they can be local, they can be whatever comes to your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So we do have an example from United Rentals on corrective action reporting. And what are we looking at here, Kevin?
So this is a very basic slide of corrective actions, and it really is unfinished if you really think about how important corrective actions are. So this just tells you one thing. It just tells you number of corrective actions. There's some other things in here that when you dig into the information, you should know, was it a global corrective action? Was it a local corrective action? Was it a corrective action based off a type of event? Was it an injury? Was it a near miss? Was it a stop work event? And also the corrective action closure rate. There's no sense in having a corrective action if you do not have a closure rate or a due date to get it done by. And that way, if you have just tracking corrective actions, then it's really not worth the effort without some sort of closure date and categorization.
Mm-hmm. Great. So thank you for explaining that example, Kevin. We wanted to spend a little time here on the next two slides. And if you're wondering, what metrics could you start to look at if you're just beginning with leading indicators? We wanted to extract those indicators and metrics from the previous tables that were ranked as reactive for maturity and also low for complexity, to take those out of those other tables and put them into their own table so that it can be easy to see which metrics may be a good starting point if just implementing leading indicators for the first time. So here is the first part of that list, those that were ranked as reactive for organizational maturity and low in complexity. So this means that these metrics should be relatively easy for safety managers to implement and also gain buy-in from higher leadership. So you can see that we included the other categories for leading indicators that are here. Some we haven't touched on yet, but they are in the paper, things like risk assessment or employee engagement and participation, communication of safety, etc. I know, so this is, the first part of that table. We also have a second part on this other slide here for other metrics that you may want to consider getting started with that the work group thought would be kind of lower in maturity and also lower in complexity. I kind of wanted to call out one of these metrics here that you see, and it's under safety perception survey, and things like percent of employees polled and also the response rate. Kevin, I know that you had something to say about perception surveys at organizations.
We do, yes. Thanks, Joy. We do a employee engagement survey, and in that engagement survey, we have questions surrounding safety. such as, do you feel that management engages you one-on-one with safety? We have a daily huddle, a mandatory daily huddle that we do every morning with a meta posture program that, for lack of a better term, it's a stretch and flex program. And so we poll our employees. How do you feel? Do you feel positively that the meta posture program has affected you? And do you like the type of communications that the employees or that you're getting? We also utilize a workplace, which is Facebook's version of Facebook for work. And it's a place where employees can engage one another. Our drivers can engage other drivers, technicians, other folks can post. And everybody has the app on their phone, so they can post something that occurred at the job site. Maybe entry or exit point has changed. So those things are also captured within the surveys and the like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, if you want to see obviously I've extracted the table from the white paper for these metrics that were reactive in maturity and low in complexity. But of course, you can see that entire list and look through it at your leisure if you have the print version of the paper or if you download the digital version. And once again, we'll provide links for that after the webinar has concluded. So you will be able to see that entire list.
And Joy, I had one more comment on that.
Sure.
So also, we spoke about it during the introduction, but to work with other departments. For instance, we have an operational excellence department at both the corporate and region level. They also, when they do a 5S assessment, which is part of their Kaizen process, there is a segment of safety in there. And so it's something that, although we have our own audits, we want to ensure that we're looking and measuring what the 5S audit does for the team. Mm-hmm. So those are things that we're putting together, and you place them up as dominoes, basically, looking at what are the leading indicators for HR, what are the leading indicators for safety and maintenance and operational excellence, and then you can start to see how one may affect the other. And so if one domino falls, you can intervene and help to prop up that manufacturing line, that plant, that branch, whatever it may be, in order to support the other indicators in other departments, so that you don't have a bigger failure on your hands.
Right. Yeah, great. Another piece of advice here. I kind of want to start to wrap up here and maybe get to some questions that you all might have. So, when we talk about future directions for the leading indicator research, we find ties to other research projects that we're currently working on. So the Institute has already released one paper on the prevention of serious injuries and fatalities. We're looking to release another one early next year. But obviously this has some tie-in with leading indicators. What are those specific leading indicators that can do more to predict serious injuries and fatalities, and if we can predict them, then we can prevent them. There are also some ties to use of AI and machine learning as leading indicators. We have a lot more technology out there that can aid us in providing the data that we use for leading indicators. And lastly, I know Kevin has something poignant to say on this, as using culture as a leading indicator. So, Kevin, you want to explain a little bit more what you mean there? Kevin?
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize.
Okay, sure.
So the culture for us, culture is the foundation that everything sets on. You need to have a strong culture in order to have a great maintenance, sales, and safety program. Because what your employees are going to do is do the right thing, even when no one is watching, or especially when no one is watching, if you have a strong culture. That's what they're going to feed back to, or what they're going to think back to when they're about ready to start that task, or maybe shortcut a system or a process. And so for me, that's something that we could go into on a future discussion or direction, is looking at organizational culture as it helps us go back deeper into leading indicators, or treating it as a separate leading indicator.
Right. Great. So we do have 5 minutes left at the end of the program here to take some of your questions. I've noticed that some questions already came in, but if you want to start typing some more, please feel free to do so. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So a question for you, Kevin. A question came in about appreciating the insight about just getting started. But when you think about predictive analytics and leading indicators, there are the concepts of false positives or false negatives that come to mind. So is there a way to balance that, the existence of false positives or false negatives with the just do it concept that we advocated for at the beginning?
Well, yeah, and our belief is that you have to start from somewhere. So yes, you may get something that's a false positive, but that's where your organization can peer back into it and say, okay, well, we aren't getting the information that we need from this indicator, from this tracking method. So let's move on to something else. And that's the great thing about just starting out and working with your other departments in your organization and seeing what's already tracked. And actually, a great way is just to have a meeting and just say, what are you tracking? And then how does it impact us from a safety perspective? Can we look at that data and begin to see, are there any definitive ideas that you can bring from that'll help move you down the road further?
Mm-hmm. Great. We have another question here about standard operating procedures. So should leading indicators that are being measured align with standard operating procedures, or at least the safe behaviors that effectively drive those SOPs? What do you think about that, Kevin?
I would say yes. So your SOPs should be part of the backbone of your system, of your safety management system. So if your SOPs are directing your employees to do something a certain way, and you find in your root cause investigation or what have you or your 5 whys that they are not, then that should be something that you are measuring and looking at from a near miss or incident standpoint. So it depends on how your logic is within your organization. But yes, it's something that definitely you want to look at and see how you'd measure it within your own system.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can squeeze in another question here, and this one is on the balance of lagging and leading indicators. So would you advocate switching from lagging to leading, or having a balance of both lagging and leading indicators? And how does United Rentals integrate these indicators into your safety management system?
That's a great question. And it's one that we tackle monthly, because as with all companies, especially for the ones that are service-oriented or contractor-oriented, to get on site, you need to have a low lagging indicator. But I would say that when you're looking at a pre-qual program, or trying to get on as a contractor trying to get on a manufacturing site, I would say more and more of our clients are looking at those leading indicators. And that's not to say that the recordable rate, TRIR, however you track it, isn't still something that is the elephant in the room. It is. But I would preface that by saying the better your leading indicators are, the less you'll have to worry about that number. And when you get to corrective actions, corrective action closure rate, and within that, within that, that terminology, you have a wide variety of different ranges and points to look at. When you're looking at those different audits and training hours and your root cause analysis, was it filled out correctly, those type of things, you'll see that number drop. And that's my belief, and actually I'm proof of that. I can say that whenever we've focused truly on leading indicators and the quality of them and a specific need for them within the business unit, that number of the lagging indicator has dropped. So for us, it is a safety is part of being a operationally effective and successful business unit. So it's not just safety as a pillar. It is something that that holds up the organization, but it is also being an efficient business unit as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered the question, but lagging indicators, yes, they're still there. They're still big, but the better focus you have on your leading indicators, those lagging indicators will fall.
Great answer, Kevin, and great advice to our audience. We are just past the top of the hour, so I want to close out. What you see on this slide is where you can find the latest white paper and all of our other research that we've done on leading indicators and more at thecampbellinstitute.org/research. The questions that you all submitted, we will get a record of those questions and we'll do our best to answer them. So if we did not get to your question this morning, we will try to do so after this webinar has concluded. And to answer the questions of whether this recording will be available, the answer is yes. In the next day or so, you should receive an email thanking you for your registration and attendance, and also be given a link to the webinar recording and also a link to those white papers. So thank you very much for attending this morning. Kevin, a big warm thank you to you for joining me on this presentation today. Really appreciate it.
Very welcome. Thank you all.
And yes, and to all of you, enjoy the rest of your day and have a safe one. Thank you.